She was crowned Empress of the richest throne on earth. 40 years later, she would bury 2 of her own children. An ocean apart. One died in a London hotel room at 31. The other pressed a pistol to his chest in a Boston house at 44. The same mother flew to both, the same grief. The same impossible question that no crown, no fortune, no title in history has ever been able to answer. How does a woman survive outliving the children she once watched run through the gardens of a palace that no longer exists? Her name is Farah Pahlavi, the last empress of Iran. She had 4 children. A crown prince, 2 princesses, and a quiet scholar prince. They were born to inherit a 2,500-year-old empire. Instead, they inherited exile, silence, and a sorrow that would hunt them down, one by one, long after the world stopped watching. This is the story of those 4 children, why the youngest slowly stopped eating and never started again, why the truth of the second death was buried under a single, careful sentence, and why the 2 who lived still almost never speak, not to the press, not to historians, not even for years, to each other. Most people remember the Shah. Almost no one remembers what the revolution did to his children years after the cameras left, in apartments and hospital rooms, far from any throne. And the photograph their mother still keeps closest, the one taken on what she once called the happiest day of her life, is the same photograph that explains everything you're about to see. She was not born royal. That part matters more than almost anything that came later. Farah Diba arrived on October 14, 1938, in Tehran, into a comfortable but ordinary family. Her father, Sohrab Diba, was an army captain, educated in France, gentle with his only daughter. Her mother, Faride, came from a respected Azerbaijani family. They were not poor, but they were not kings. And then, when Farah was 9 years old, her father died. The money grew thin. The big house was gone. Farah and her mother moved in with relatives, sharing rooms, counting costs. The girl who would one day own some of the largest jewels on the planet learned, early, what it felt like to have the floor disappear beneath a family. She would feel that exact sensation again. She just didn't know it yet. She poured herself into school instead of self-pity. She was tall, athletic, sharp, captain of her school basketball team, a scholarship girl with a stubborn mind. In 1957, she did something few Iranian women of her generation did. She left for Paris, alone, to study architecture at the École Spéciale d'Architecture. She wanted to design buildings. She lived on a student's budget in a cold city, the daughter of a dead captain, sketching blueprints by lamplight. Then, in 1959, the most powerful man in Iran walked into the room. Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, the Shah of Iran, was visiting Paris. He was also, quietly, a man in crisis. He had been married twice. His first wife gave him a daughter, then a divorce. His second wife, the beautiful Soraya, he loved deeply, but she could not give him a son, and an empire needs an heir, so he divorced the woman he loved for the future of a dynasty. He arrived in Paris wounded, searching, and politically desperate for a child. Farah was introduced to him at a reception. She was 20, he was 40. The courtship moved fast. By November they were engaged. On December 21st, 1959, she married him in Tehran, in a gown designed by Yves Saint Laurent for the House of Dior, beneath a crown of diamonds. The scholarship student from a shared apartment was now the Queen of Iran. But everyone, the court, the country, the Shah himself, was really asking only one thing. Could she give him a son? On October 31st, 1960, the answer came. When a royal child was born, Tradition called for a salute of cannon fire, 21 guns for a daughter, 101 for a son. Across Tehran, an entire nation stood still in the streets and counted. 21, 22. The crowd held its breath. The guns kept firing. 60, 80, 100, 101. A son. Crown Prince Reza. The dynasty had its heir. The relief turned Farah from a nervous young bride into something far more powerful. Over the next 10 years, she gave the Shah 3 more children. Princess Farah in 1963, Prince Alireza in 1966, and the baby of the family, Princess Leila, in 1970. 4 children. A full golden nursery at the heart of the peacock throne. And Farah refused to be a decoration. She built schools and clinics, championed Iranian art, pulled ancient artifacts back from foreign museums. In 1967, the Shah did something no Iranian monarch had done in modern history. At his own coronation, he placed a crown on her head and named her Shahbanu Empress, and declared her regent, the woman who would rule if he died before their son came of age. She had climbed from a shared room in mourning to the second most powerful seat in the Middle East. And then came the day she would call the happiest of her life. October 1971, Persepolis, the ruins of the ancient Persian capital lit up against the desert night. The Shah throws a celebration for 2,500 years of Persian monarchy, and it becomes the most extravagant party of the entire century. A tent city rises in the sand, built by French designers. The food is flown in from Maxims of Paris. 60 kings, queens and presidents arrive from around the world to bow toward Iran. And there, in the warm dark, surrounded by emperors, stands Farah. Her husband on his throne, her 4 small children dressed in white, the desert glowing gold behind them. In that moment she believes completely, the way you only believe a thing right before you lose it, that this will last forever, that her children will inherit all of it. Look closely at that scene, hold it, because it is the last time this family is whole, safe and untouched. Underneath the gold, the ground was already cracking. The party that dazzled the world enraged millions of Iranians who lived on far less. The spending, the foreign guests, the distance between the palace and the street, it all hardened into resentment. Her 4 children were growing up behind walls and bodyguards, tutored in French and English, lifted in and out of armoured cars, loved fiercely, but raised at a careful distance from the country they were promised. They knew palaces, they barely knew Iran. And the Shah himself was hiding something. By the mid-1970s, French doctors had quietly told him he was sick. Cancer. He told no one for years, not his ministers, not his generals, not even Farah. He smiled for the cameras with a secret growing inside him, ruling an empire that was running out of time faster than he was. Before we go on, you need to understand one thing about Farah Pahlavi. She did not marry power for comfort, she believed in it, the throne, the future, the idea that her children's path was carved in stone. Because the next 5 years would take that belief and break it across her in ways no crown on earth could have prepared her for. For a few more years, the illusion held. In the mid-1970s, oil money flooded into Iran and the family floated on top of it. Reza, the heir, was a confident teenager already training as a fighter pilot. Farah was the soft-spoken, watchful one. Alireza was bright and intense, the boy who asked too many questions. And Leila the baby was the family's small, bright spark, doted on by everyone, a little girl who danced through palace hallways that seemed like they would always be hers. They had tutors and horses and summer palaces. They had a mother who adored them and a father who was, to the world, a king. From the inside, it must have felt unbreakable. It was already over. They just hadn't been told. The first tremors came in 1977. Protests, strikes, crowds that grew instead of scattering. By 1978, the country was on fire. Students, clerics, workers, all turning against the throne at once. On September the 8th, 1978, soldiers opened fire on demonstrators in Tehran. The day was named Black Friday. After that, there was no put back. And the Shah, the man who was supposed to be steel, was crumbling in body and in nerve. The cancer he had hidden for 4 years was draining him. He hesitated when he should have acted, softened when his generals begged him to be hard, and the revolution read his weakness like a headline. The children watched their father, the King of Kings, grow grey and uncertain at the dinner table. On January 16th, 1979, it ended. The Shah and Farah board a plane to leave Iran on what is officially called a vacation. Everyone in that airport knows it is a lie. On the tarmac, an officer throws himself down and kisses the Shah's feet, begging him not to go. The Shah, weeping, bends and takes a small handful of Iranian soil to carry with him. Farah climbs the stairs in a dark coat, turns once to look at the country she ruled, and then the door closes. They would never see Iran again. None of them, not the parents, not one of the 4 children. What followed was not exile in any clean sense. It was a humiliating country-by-country search for anyone on earth willing to take a fallen king. Egypt took them, briefly. Then Morocco. Then the Bahamas, where the rent was brutal and the welcome cold. Then Mexico. The family that had hosted 60 heads of state was now packing and unpacking suitcases like fugitives, dragging 4 frightened children across borders, watching former friends stop returning calls. Then the cancer forced the worst decision of all. In October 1979, gravely ill, the Shah was admitted to the United States for treatment. Iran erupted. Furious that America had sheltered the man they'd overthrown, students stormed the US Embassy in Tehran and seized 52 American hostages. Overnight, the dying Shah became the most radioactive man on the planet, and the United States, the country that had just taken him in, began looking for a way to push him back out. So the family ran again, Panama, then back to Egypt, where President Sadat, almost alone in the world, offered them dignity and a place to stop running. It was there, in Cairo, that the first death came. On July 27th, 1980, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi died. Cancer, exile, and exhaustion finally finished what the revolution started. He was 60 years old. Farah was at his bedside. So were the children Reza, now 19, Farah 17, Alireza, just 14, and Leila, only 10 years old, standing at her father's funeral in a black dress made for a child, watching soldiers carry the man she worshipped through the streets of a foreign city. Understand what that day did to these 4. They did not just lose a father. They lost the one fixed point in a life that had already lost its country, its language on the street, its future, its home. Their father had been their last proof that the old world was real. Now he was in a tomb in Cairo, and they were stateless teenagers and children with famous names and no nation to belong to. Each of them carried it differently, and how they carried it would decide, quietly, which of them would survive. Reza, the eldest, hardened it into a mission. At 20, he stood up and declared himself his father's heir, the rightful king in waiting, and built his entire adult life around one promise to return. He had something to push against. That may have saved him. Farah turned inward. The watchful girl became a private woman who studied psychology, avoided cameras, and slowly built a wall of silence around herself so complete that to this day the public knows almost nothing about her inner life. Alireza absorbed it like a wound that wouldn't close. Brilliant, sensitive, he buried himself in study ancient Iranian history, the very civilization his family had ruled and lost. He went to Princeton, to Columbia, to Harvard, surrounding himself with the glory of old Persia, precisely because the living version had been taken from him. The grief didn't fade in him. It went deeper, and it waited. And Leila the baby, the bright spark, never let her father go at all. She had been 10, old enough to remember the gardens, the dancing, the palaces, young enough that all of it was ripped away before she could understand why. She idolized the man in the tomb. She measured every year that followed against a childhood that had been perfect and then, without warning, simply ended. Outwardly, Farah held the family together with extraordinary control. She wore mourning black with a straight spine. She moved them to the United States, made a home in exile, kept the family name standing. To the world's cameras, she was the dignified widow empress, composed, unbroken. Behind that composure, the wounds went untreated. There were no thrones left to fight over, so the grief had nowhere to go but inward. The press lost interest. A dead Shah was old news, and his children were just the sad leftovers of a vanished regime. No one was watching the youngest two anymore. No one saw the youngest girl beginning to push food around her plate. Then away from it. No one was counting the years that depression was quietly sinking its roots into a teenage scholar in a New England library. The family that survived the revolution told itself the worst was behind them. They had buried the father. They had escaped with their lives. Surely that was the bottom. It wasn't, because losing their father was not the worst thing that would happen to this family. 2 of those 4 children were carrying a wound that no exile, no doctor, and no passing year would ever close. And the first one it would claim was the youngest. The little girl who once danced through palace gardens that no longer existed. For a while, exile settled into something that almost looked like peace. By the 1990s, the family had a home in the United States and another in Paris. Reza had married, started a family, built a political life in waiting. Farah had her studies and her privacy. There were birthdays, dinners where everyone sat at one table again, photographs where the 4 grown children stood around their mother and smiled. And the smiles looked real, because some of them were. Leila was the bright one in those rooms, the youngest, tall now, striking, with her mother's dark eyes. She modelled briefly for Valentino. She moved between Paris and London and New York, the beautiful exiled princess the magazines liked to photograph. To the outside, she looked like the one who had landed softly. She had not. None of them really saw how far she was falling, because she was falling so quietly. It started with food, the way it so often does. Slowly, a meal skipped, a plate pushed half an inch away, then further. Leila had carried something out of that childhood, that the others couldn't reach the memory of being 10 years old at her father's funeral, of palace gardens that existed now only in her own head. She idolized the dead Shah. She measured her whole life against a perfection that had ended when she was a child, and the gap between the two kept widening, and into that gap went the eating, the sleep, the steadiness. By her late 20s, she was being treated for severe depression and an eating disorder. She drifted between clinics and hotels. She grew thin, then frightening thin. Her mother flew to her, sat with her, begged doctors, begged her daughter. Farah later wrote that watching Leila disappear was a torture she had no defense against. Then came June 2001, London, the Leonard Hotel in Knightsbridge. Leila checks into a quiet suite. She is 31 years old. She is exhausted in a way sleep can't fix. Over the days that follow, she takes the pills she has been prescribed, and more than she has been prescribed. On the morning of June 10th, she does not come down. She does not answer. They find her in the bed. She looks, they say, like she is sleeping. Princess Leila Pahlavi was born on March 27, 1970, the last child of an empire that had less than a decade left to give her. She was, by every account, the most tender of the four, the one who felt everything the deepest, who never grew the protective shell the others did. The coroner's inquest was clinical and merciless. Leila had died from the effects of barbiturate seconal combined with cocaine. The level of one drug in her system was reported at around 5 times a normal dose. The verdict stopped short of calling it deliberate. A young woman, severely ill, profoundly depressed, who had finally taken more than her body could survive. Here is the detail that stays with you. In her hotel room, she had kept photographs of her father near her. The little girl from the Persepolis celebration, from the white dresses and the desert gold, had carried that lost world with her for 30 years, all the way to a hotel bed in a foreign city. She never put it down. In the end, the weight of it was simply too much. Her mother was not in the room. Farah received the call. The Empress, who had buried a husband, now had to fly to London to bury her baby. Leila was laid to rest in Paris, at the Passy Cemetery, in the cold ground of the country that had taken her family in but was never home. In public, Farah did what she had always done. She stood straight. She thanked people for their condolences. She protected the family's dignity with the same iron control she had worn out of Tehran 22 years before. In private, something had broken that would never fully set again. A mother had outlived a child. The one loss the human mind is not built to carry. And inside that grief was a second, sharper fear she did not say out loud. Because Leila was not the only one of her children still carrying the wound of that vanished childhood. There was another, quieter, older, even more like her in his sensitivity. A son who flew to his little sister's funeral, stood at her grave in Paris, and went home to America carrying her death added on top of his own. Watch him, because the family knew. They watched him too. But Leila's death was not the worst thing that would happen to this family. 10 years later, in a house outside Boston, the brother who buried her would make a decision so devastating that his own family would explain it to the world in a single, carefully written sentence, and refuse to say anything more. To understand what happened in 2011, you have to understand Alireza Pahlavi. Because of all 4 children, he was the one who tried to outthink his grief. He was born on April 28, 1966, the second son. Where Reza chose politics and Leila chose the surface, Alireza chose the past. He became a scholar, a serious one. He studied at Princeton, then Columbia, then Harvard, where he pursued ancient Iranian studies and philology, the languages and history of pre-Islamic Persia. Think about what that means. The civilization his family had ruled and lost, he spent his adult life trying to recover it on paper, word by word. Because it could no longer exist any other way. He surrounded himself with the glory of old Iran precisely because the living country had been taken from him. He was brilliant, gentle, and intensely private. He almost never spoke to the press, and after Leila died in 2001, the people closest to him watched the light in him dim by degrees. He had loved her. He had flown to London, stood at the Passy Cemetery, and absorbed her death into a grief he was already carrying. The father, the country, the exile, and now the little sister. He kept working. He kept living, on the surface. For 10 more years he held it. He could not hold it forever. January 4th, 2011. South Boston. Alireza Pahlavi is 44 years old. He is alone in his home. That morning he takes a gun, and he ends his own life. There is no long note explaining a decade of pain. There is only the silence afterward, and a family 3,000 miles of habit away from being able to stop it. The second son of the Peacock Throne, the scholar, the keeper of the lost language, is gone in an instant. In a quiet house, in a cold New England winter, as far from the gardens of Tehran as a human being can get. His mother was once again not in the room. And once again, the phone rang. Now watch how this family trained from birth to control the message, to never show the wound, chose to tell the world. His older brother Reza, the heir, released a statement. And instead of hiding the cause, instead of inventing a softer story, he did something almost unbearably honest. He named the grief directly. He said that Alireza, like millions of young Iranians, was deeply disturbed by all the ills fallen upon his beloved homeland, and that he had carried the burden of losing a beloved father and a dear sister in his young life, and that despite his many years of trying, he finally succumbed to his sorrows. Read that again. Succumbed to his sorrows. A royal family that had spent half a century projecting strength stood in front of the world and admitted that one of its sons had been killed, slowly, by sadness, by exile, by a wound that started when he was a boy watching his father's coffin in Cairo and never closed. That single sentence is the truth the whole video has been building toward. The tragic fate of Farah Pahlavi's 4 children was not bad luck, and it was not scandal. It was grief, the long, patient, generational kind that follows a family across decades and oceans and waits. And now, Farah. By January 2011, she is 72 years old. She has already buried her husband and her youngest daughter. She is the dignified empress in exile, the woman who never cracks in public. This is the loss that cracks her. She does not give a long interview. She does not perform her grief. What we know comes out slowly, in the years after, in her memoir, in rare, quiet conversations. She describes a darkness that does not lift. She describes the unique horror of a mother who has now outlived 2 of her 4 children, who has stood at 2 graves she was never supposed to stand at. She, who once counted cannon fire across Tehran waiting to hear if her son had been born, now counts the children she has left. 2, Reza, Farhanaz, 2 who survived, 2 who did not. There is a detail from this period that says more than any statement. In the deepest part of it, those close to her described a woman moving through her days on will alone, answering letters, attending to the family name, keeping the spine straight in public and then, in private, simply stopping. A mother sitting with photographs. The same photographs, again, Persepolis, the white dresses, the desert gold, the 4 small children who were promised an empire. She had kept that image for 40 years, the way Leila kept it, the way Alireza kept it, the happiest day of her life, and it had become the most painful object she owned, because it showed her all 4 of them, whole, on the one night she believed nothing could ever touch them. The press, when Alireza died, mostly reported it plainly. The fallen prince, the second child lost. The tragic Pahlavi curse, that phrase started appearing, the lazy, cruel shorthand that turned a family's real grief into a spooky headline, Cursed Dynasty, the doomed Pahlavis. As if depression and exile and the loss of a country were superstition instead of cause and effect. That framing did something quietly damaging. It let the world look away. A curse is nobody's fault and nobody's lesson. A curse you can shiver at and forget. But there was no curse. There were 4 children torn out of their home, their language, their future, and their father, before some of them were old enough to understand it. And 2 of them never found their way back from that. The family knew the difference. That is part of why they say so little. Why Farah, the surviving sister, has spent her entire life behind a wall of silence. Why Farah, when she does speak, speaks carefully. They are not hiding a scandal. They are guarding the 2 children they have left from being turned into a headline too. But if you think the deaths are where this story ends, you're not ready for what comes next. Because there is a part of the Pahlavi story the survivors almost never discuss. A child who was born after the tragedies, who carries the name of an empire that no longer exists. And a question Farah Pahlavi has had to answer in the quietest years of her life. When you have lost this much, what is left to live for? The answer is the part of this story almost no one knows. So who is left? Reza, Farah, the eldest and the second born. The 2 children who found a way to carry the same wound that killed their siblings. And kept walking anyway. Reza Pahlavi turned his grief outward into purpose. He never stopped calling for a free Iran. He built a life as the exiled face of an alternative future for the country that exiled him. Testifying, organizing, speaking, decade after decade. A king without a kingdom, who decided the work itself was worth doing. Whether or not he ever sees Iran again, that mission is almost certainly what kept him on the other side of the line his brother and sister crossed. He had somewhere to put the pain. Farah chose the opposite path, and it is just as much a survival. The watchful girl became a deeply private woman. She studied psychology. She stayed out of frame. She gave the public almost nothing. And that silence is not coldness, it is armor. She watched what the spotlight did to a family. She decided she would not feed it. She is still here. Sometimes survival looks like refusing to perform. And then there is the part of the story that almost no one knows. The answer to the question we left hanging. When Alireza died in January 2011, his partner, Raha Didavar, was pregnant. 6 months later, on July 26, 2011, a baby girl was born, a daughter. Alireza's child, who would never meet her father, born into the same exiled family, carrying the same vanished name. They called her Iriana Leila Pahlavi. Leila. They gave her the name of the aunt who died in a London hotel 10 years before she was born. The bright spark of the family, gone, and now her name placed gently on a new life that arrived just after the family's darkest year. Think about what that child meant to Farah Pahlavi. She had counted, in the worst years, the children she had left. 2 living, 2 gone. And then, out of the death of her son, came a granddaughter she never expected, proof that the family did not end at the graves. The Empress, who buried a husband and 2 children, became a grandmother again at the exact moment she needed a reason to keep going. That is the answer to what is left to live for. Not a throne. Not a return to Iran. A baby girl named after the daughter she lost, born to the son she lost. The future of this family was never going to be an empire. It was going to be this children carrying the names of the dead, and a grandmother determined that they would know they were loved. Farah Pahlavi is alive today. 87 years old, she divides her time between the United States and Paris, near the cemetery where Leila rests. She has outlived her husband and 2 of her 4 children. She has lost a country, a crown, 2 homes, and half her family. And she is still, by every account of those who meet her, composed, gracious, unbroken, in the way that matters not unhurt, but unbroken. She wrote her memoir. She tells her children's story so that the world remembers them as people, not as a curse. She keeps the photographs. She keeps the names alive. When she is asked how she carries it, she does not pretend it doesn't hurt. She has said, in essence, that a mother who loses a child loses a part of herself that never grows back, and that she lives with that absence every single day. But she also speaks about her surviving children, her grandchildren, and her hope for Iran. She refuses to let the ending of the story be despair. That is the real inheritance of the 4 children of the last Empress of Iran, not jewels. Not a throne. A mother who decided that remembering them accurately, tenderly, out loud was the last act of love available to her, and who has spent the rest of her long life performing it. 2 of her children the world lost too soon, 2 are still standing, and 1 little girl, born from grief and named for a lost aunt, carries all of it forward. So go back to that photograph. Persepolis, 1971. The desert glowing gold. The Shah on his throne. And Farah, surrounded by 4 small children in white, on the night she believed nothing could ever touch them. She was right about one thing. That night would last forever, just not the way she meant. It would last as the image she'd hold in the hardest rooms of her life, the last time all 4 of them were whole. Leila, the tender one, who carried her lost childhood until it was too heavy to hold. Alireza, the scholar, who tried to recover a vanished world and finally succumbed to the loss of it. Reza, who turned his grief into a mission. Farah Naz, who turned hers into silence. 4 children handed an empire and given exile instead, and a mother who buried 2 of them and refused to let the world reduce them to a curse. It was never a curse. It was grief, the long generational kind. And the only thing stronger than it, in the end, was a mother who kept saying their names. If this story moved you, take 1 second to honor them. Leave a single word in the comments. Their names. Leila. Alireza. Let them be remembered as people, not a headline. And if you want more true stories of the family's history tried to turn into legends, the real human cost behind the crowns, subscribe and watch the story I've linked right here next. Because the one thing every empire forgets is that thrones don't bleed. People do. Thank you for watching.